Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to our Unity Endless Runner tutorial series, where we're taking a look at how to add some power-ups to your game. So previously we added power-ups into the game, but now we want to do some more stuff. A problem we had with the way we were initially first doing our power-up, so we had one that would double our points, but we also had one that, if it starts playing here, you see it's supposed to get rid of all the spikes. So what it does is, oh wait, did I have that not set to that? Hold on. It's handy if you put it on the right option. So we have our safe mode one. What it's supposed to do is stop the spikes appearing, but what it actually does is it stops any more spikes appearing. So we saw there was one spike just here, so it doesn't get rid of all the spikes on the screen. So that's what we would prefer it to do. And there's a very straightforward way to do this, and it was a way suggested by Azure Dreams in the comment down below. The previous video, it was effectively the same way I was going to do it anyway, but it was absolutely the right thinking that I was having for it. So what we need to do is open up our Powerup manager, which is what we've been using to control what the power-ups are doing. We go in here to mono develop. Obviously I have a few things open here, and essentially all we want to do is basically the same way that we find our platforms in the world and remove all of them. If we go to our game manager here, when the game is reset, we go and we find all the platforms and we set them not to be active anymore. We're essentially going to do the same thing with spikes. Now what we could do is just go straight to the object pool that controls the spikes and just loop through that. It would be relatively simple, but I want to show a slightly different way of finding specific objects within a certain set. So what we're going to do is do the exact same thing from our game manager, which is to find all the platforms that have the platform destroyer attached to it. So we're just going to copy this and paste it into our Powerup manager. We're going to make some changes to it then. We're just going to paste it in there for a second. Obviously we're not going to use a platform list because we want to do our spikes. So we're going to do up here private. It'll still be a platform destroyer array. So platform destroyer, we're going to call this our spike list. And then down here, we only want this to run if safe mode is active on the power up that we picked up. So if safe mode is true, then we want to run this whole bit of code in here. And obviously we don't want to use platform list, we want to use spike list. So we'll just change all these platform lists here to spike list, just like that. So now it'll do the exact same thing that the game manager does. It'll find every object that has a platform destroyer attached to it, and it'll get rid of it when we enter safe mode. But obviously what that'll do straight away is delete all the platforms underneath the player, and we definitely don't want it to do that. So we want to add in an extra check to see what the name of the object that we're searching, or of the objects that we want to actually get rid of. So if we go back in here and we go to our prefabs, we see our spikes are called spikes. But if we run the game, when they're generated by the spike pool, they're called spikes clone, with a little bracket after them or whatever. So again, what we could do here is just say if basically the object that we're looking at within the spike list currently, so spike list I.game object, no, not pike list, a spike list. If spike list I.game object dot name is equal to spikes and then bracket clone, the exact same way it appears in the game, then do this little bit of code here, which is what it'll do if we just put it between some curly brackets like this. So then it'll check the exact same thing that we have in here, and it'll say, okay, if it's called spikes clone, that's absolutely fine. But if you're creating lots of these kind of things, you're not necessarily always going to remember that when you create an object pool, it's going to have clone attached to the end of it. You might forget that fairly simply, and suddenly you're left with a big mess. So instead, rather than checking to see if the name of it matches exactly, what we can do is get rid of the clone bit, because we know for sure it's going to have spikes in it, and depending on the way you're using Unity, with different functions, obviously this object pool creates a clone and all that, that's fine, but sometimes when you import things into Unity, you might get, so if we drag that in here, we got spikes, we drag another one in, we got spikes bracket 1, spikes bracket 2, so maybe if you wanted to start your game with, you always have a certain amount of spikes in there, suddenly now the spikes clone won't get rid of these if you hit a safe mode, so that wouldn't be useful at all. So what we want to do is say, instead of searching for a name that equals spikes clone, and if we set it to be name equals just spikes like this, then it'll, if it has clone afterwards, it'll say, oh, that's not the same word, so that'll be wrong. What we want to do is say gameObject.name.contains, like that. So now it'll say, okay, let's find any of these objects that are that have a platform destroyer attached that have spikes in the name. So now if we save this and go back in here and wait for that to compile in there, I'm going to say on our platform generator, I'm going to make our spikes definitely appear. So we'll set that to 100. Oh, we got a wrong thing here. Spike list. Oh no, sorry, it's not contains equals spikes, contains bracket spikes. Sorry, that was the wrong thing there. So you have to put the word that you want it to search for in the names inside some brackets. Go back in here. Okay, yes, that's compiled. So now I've set that to 100, so we'll definitely get some spikes on the platforms ahead of us. And we should see, if we let it roll here. Okay, so we got our spikes there, that's all fine. They're definitely appearing just the way we wanted to. If we restart, oh no, we've lost our power up. Start again. But what we should get now is if we run into a power up, all the spikes ahead of the player. Oh, well, if I could actually manage to walk into the power up, that would be nice too. There we go. We saw the spikes that were up here disappeared out of the game, so we make it immediately a lot safer for the player to play the game. So that's perfect. That's just exactly how we want that to operate. But now we need to generate our power-ups in the world. So we obviously don't want this power-up staying here the whole time, so we're going to make this power-up here a prefab. I'm actually just going to call it power-up rather than power-up 1. Drag that in there like that. And for now, we're going to turn off either ability, because what we're actually going to do is rather than have a whole load of separate power-up objects, all we would need to do is on our power-up script, so we have the different options for what a power-up can be, all we need to do is when a power-up is generated, basically say, okay, the power-up has appeared in the world, we need to decide what kind of power-up it's going to be. And it's very, very straightforward to do that. But first of all, we need to decide where a power-up is going to appear. We just delete this power-up from there. We're obviously going to need another Powerup Pool. So we got our spike pool, and then we're going to need a Powerup Pool. So let's create that very quickly here, because we know how to do that already. So we're just going to say Powerup Pool, and we need to add our object pool script to that. Object pooler script even. And our pooled object will be our Powerup. And we'll just start with 5. That should be plenty. And then we need to go into our scripts and into our platform generator script. And if we open this up here, okay. So now what we're going to need in here is, the way we're going to do it is basically we're going to set our objects to appear at the end of a platform, but raised above. So the player has to jump and grab them while they're jumping for something else, rather than have them be in the middle of the platform like we have our coins or anything like that. So what we're going to do is, if we go to here, we need to set a height for our platform generator. So we'll call that we'll say public float Powerup height. So this is how high it'll appear in the air above us. We'll obviously need to make a reference to that Powerup object pool we created. So our public object pooler, and this will be our Powerup Pool. And we'll also need a number to make our power-ups randomly appear. So public float power-up threshold. Okay, so now where our power-ups are going to appear is slightly different to where we have our platforms being generated and our coins and our spikes being generated as well. Well, obviously it relates to where our platforms are being generated, but basically what we want to do is say at this point here, we've got our transformed position being changed for the first time. And what happens after our platforms, when our platforms are generated in the game, what we do is it always ends at the platform. So what we're happening every time is it goes from the end of a platform, then we add on a little bit of space, move in half the distance of the object, make a new one, and then move half again to the end point. That's what we're doing every single time we're generating a platform. So what we want to do is say, okay, before we move ahead any further, and before we add on the space and stuff like that, what we want to do is right at the end of the platform here, we're going to say, okay, generate a new power up round about here in the air somewhere. So if we go back in here, so this is the first time our generation point is being moved forward. So here we're going to say, okay, we need to decide whether we're going to randomly generate our power up. And much like we did down here with random spikes and random coins, we're going to use the same random.range method. So if random.range is less than, what did we call it? Random power up. What did we call it? Power up. We just call it power up threshold. Okay. Probably should have stuck with the same naming conventions as the other things, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter too much. Okay. So within this, we're going to say, okay, so if our we didn't set a value, random.range between 0f and 100f, there we go. We actually need to set a value for the random range. So if it's between 0 and 100, and if that's less than our power up threshold, then we're going to create a power up. So then we need to obviously create that power up. So in here we're going to say game object new power up. So a game object that is the new power up we're creating, and what that's going to be is from our Powerup pool, we're going to grab a new pool object like that, much like we did for the spikes and the coins before. And then we're going to say, okay, we're going to move the transform position of this object. So new Powerup dot transform dot position is equal to transform dot position. So that's the position of where our generation point is right now, which is what our platform generator script is attached to. And we're also going to add on some new values to that. So a new vector 3. We don't want the x position, so left and right, to change. So we're going to leave that as 0f. You could make that change if you wanted. You could work out half the distance between. The distance which has been created here. Actually, let's do that just for the sake of keeping it nice and simple. So we don't even need to work out half. We just literally need to say distance between divided by 2, like that. So now it'll appear in the middle between the two platforms, and then we need to go up the amount of height that we set. So we'll say our power up height. I think, did we call it that? No, what did we call it? We go back up here, power up height. Yes, we did. It's just monodevelop being silly and not letting me pick the right thing. There it is, power up height. And then finally, we don't want to change the Z position at all. We wanted to say exactly where it is. So now it'll go halfway between the two new platforms, and it'll add on a little bit of height so it'll appear above the thing. And then finally, what we need to do is set our new power up dot set active true. So now so then we know that our new power up has been activated. We got something weird going on here. Oh, I didn't put a semicolon at the end of that sentence. That was what happened there. Why aren't you? Oh, it's a capital S. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so now if we save that and we go back in and we'll just hook everything up the way we want it to be, and we should see that our power-ups are being generated. And then finally, then we're going to see how we can decide which power-up type it has. So in our, we have our Powerup pool set up, don't we? Yes, we do. So in our platform generator, all we need to do is drag our Powerup pool to there. Powerup height, we'll set that to 4, say. That sounds like a good enough value. And just to make sure we're testing and making sure it's working, we're going to set the Powerup threshold to 100. And we're going to set this spike threshold back down nice and low so we're not running into spikes all the time. Okay, so now hopefully if everything has worked the way it should be working, we should press play here. There we go, we're getting our Powerup in the middle of the platforms. We are having a bit of a thing here where it's appearing too high off the screen, but that's fine. That's just a matter of like adjusting the height and seeing where your position height should be. Set that to 3, say. Actually, let's make it a bit more interesting. We could, well, to make it a bit more interesting, we're not going to, let's do it. Okay, I wasn't going to, but we can set a random range for our height. So random range, random dot range, even between 0f and our Powerup height. So just close that. So now it'll go randomly between 0 and whatever height we set. It'll randomly appear at some different height there. That might end up being bad for us, but whatever, that's okay. So we just play again just to make sure that works, which it should, because we've used random.range many times now. So we see, there we go, we're getting these ones that are kind of a bit low. There's a few different heights and stuff like that. So that's how you can end up with like a little, it makes the power-ups a little bit more hard to collect. They're probably actually a little bit too low, to be honest. So let's even just set this to be, the lowest value is half of the Powerup height. So Powerup height divided by 2f. Okay, that's fine. We won't go near that anymore. So we know our power-ups are definitely being generated fine. That's exactly what we want. So that's perfect. So now we need to be able to set what kind of ability the power-up has when it's created. And we also want the power-up to change how it looks, because we don't want all the power-ups to be green every single time. We want them to be able to be a different color for each different ability. So if we go back to our art folder and we open this, we see we have a green and a blue one. So that's our 2 different colors, and we've got 2 different abilities. If we go back to our prefabs, we've got 2 different abilities here. So we might as well use green for double points and blue for safe mode. Obviously, you can use different colors if you have more options and more different power-up abilities being used. And the way we're going to do it all is in our power-ups here, in our power-up script. And it's actually very, very straightforward and simple to do. What we need to do is be able to know which images we want to use, obviously. So we're going to have to create a simple little array. So public sprite, that's a small p, should be, public sprite, and then our square brackets for array. So this is making reference to sprite objects, which is just basically images. So public sprite, and we're going to call this Powerup sprites. So I'm just going to save this and pop back in here and just wait for this to compile, and we'll see this here now. If we go, it's done. Okay, so Powerup sprites. So here we've got an array. There's nothing in it at the moment. So if we go into our art folder, and we can see we've dropped this one down already. And what we're going to do is drag the green sprite onto the word Powerup sprites here, and then it pops in there. And we're going to grab the blue one, pop him there, and now we've got a blue one in there. So now we've got 2 different options for us to use on our sprites, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. And if we go back in here now, what we're going to do is say, basically what we want to happen is when the object is generated, it becomes active, and then it should choose which power-up it has. Now we've used the start function lots of times for when the object is first brought into the world, and it, for example here, it searches for the Powerup manager, so it knows what the Powerup manager is. And that's fine, but that only happens the very, very first time it's created in the game. It doesn't happen again once it starts being called again. We're going to get rid of this update loop. But we can use a function called void awake, and then some brackets and curly brackets. And basically what awake does is anytime an object becomes active in the world, which is what we're doing every time we're generating an object, it will run whatever's in this awake function here. So we know we've got 2 power-ups here. So we're going to choose a number between 0 and 2. So we're going to do create an int called a Powerup selector. And that will be a random.range between 0 and 2. And the way random.range works, if we go back to where were we just doing that in our platform manager. So when you're using random.range, if you're using it on a float value like the Powerup height here, for example, which is, we could set that to 3.5 or whatever, what it'll do, it'll go between the bottom number, which could be, let's just say it's 0, up to the top number, 3.5, and it'll randomly generate a number anywhere between 0 and 3.5, but it could also possibly be 0 and 3.5, which is perfectly fine. But if we do it with an int, so a whole number, what it'll do is say it'll randomly generate a number between 0 and 2, but it won't ever be the top number. In this case, it could only be 0 and 1. But if it was, say, between 0 and 10, it could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But it won't ever be 10. So that's important to remember when you're using random.range on int values. And it's a very helpful thing to know as well. So then we can create a switch system. So what switches work by is if a certain value basically is true, or a certain value is given, then it'll run different objects. It'll make a little more sense once we get it going here. So we're going to say switch based on the Powerup selector. And we know our Powerup selector will randomly be either 0 or 1 now. So we do switch Powerup selector, and we put some curly brackets. And basically what we say is case, and first of all we say case 0, because one of the situations is our Powerup selector could be 0. So in the case that it is 0, what we'll say is we'll set a colon there, and we'll say, okay, so if the Powerup selector is 0, then what we want is for double points to be equal to true. So that's how we know our double points mode will be activated, and that's fine. And then when you're using a switch case like this, whenever you come to the end of the whenever you come to the end of whatever you want to do, what you'll say is, okay, we will break from that, and then it won't read any more code after that point, because we know that case 0 was true, so we don't want Powerup selector to be read as anything else. So if case 0 isn't true, so if our Powerup selector isn't 0, our only other option is case 1. So our Powerup selector could be 1. If we set this random.range between like 0 and 5, for example, we could have case 1, 2, 3, 4 just the exact same as well. That's one of the handy things about it. You can do as many as you want. It's not just these two options for you. So case 1, then we have safe mode is equal to true. And again, we want to put break at the end of it so that it stops reading any more after this point. It doesn't need to know anymore. It doesn't need to go back and check again. So for example, if our Powerup selector is 0, it'll read this bit. It'll say break. Okay, we don't need to read any more of the code down here. We can just get out of this whole switch part of the code and move on to whatever's next. So now we know that our Powerup, our double points is either active or our safe mode is active. But we need to change what our image looks like based on which one it is. And the way we can do that is by going through our sprite array up here, which is our Powerup sprites. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, our Powerup script is attached to the Powerup object itself. So we know that also attached to this object, if we just scroll up here, is our sprite renderer, and this is what controls how the object looks. So just for example, if we go in here, if we drag our coin look into there, and just grab this prefab into the world, suddenly now it looks like a coin. Or if we drag the blue guy onto there, suddenly he looks like the blue one. So whatever you do, it'll do something different. So we just delete that and go back to our prefab, and we don't want him to look like a coin anymore, so we'll just pop him there like that. Okay, so if we just go back in here so we can see, so we have our sprite render, and basically what we want to do is get that component. So we'll say get component, and then in our spiky brackets sprite renderer, and on the sprite render what we want to look at is dot sprite. So we can see here we've got our sprite element. That's what we want to be able to change. So our sprite render dot sprite that's attached to the current object is equal to, we need some brackets here, that's why we're getting a little bit of red there, is equal to, in our Powerup sprites array, no, not Powerup length, Powerup sprites, in that array what we want to do is find the object that's the exact same as our Powerup selector. So if we Powerup selector is 0 and then double points is true, we want to get the green guy, and if it's 1 and safe mode is true, we want to get the blue guy. So we just put in Powerup selector here, just like that, and I will save this and pop back into the game, and we should see when our object is generated, we should see some different colored ones appearing, and we should see double points or safe mode becoming true on those various different ones. So if we hit play here now, let's just have a quick look. So we've got a green one here. Has he got the right thing? Yes, he's got double points activated. If we go to the blue guy up here, if it'll let me, I didn't mean to move just let me, on the UI, I want to lock that so I can't click on the UI. It was getting in the way there. So now the blue fella here, does he have safe mode? Yes, he does. That's absolutely perfect. We go on here. Obviously the rest of them should be the exact same safe mode. We haven't got any more platforms. We should see now though, if we restart again, we can activate that for some double points. We've now got rid of safe mode. And as you can see, we're dying. It's a little bit random, a little bit more interesting. Obviously there's way too many power-ups going on here at the moment, but that's fine. But there you go. That's how you can add a little bit of random into our power-ups and add a little bit of the ability to change how the power-ups appear based on what kind of power-up they are. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll be back soon with some more tutorial goodness. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.